Right, it's time for our next debate. That last one was pretty feisty, so let's go again. Who is going to go for it, Renee?
Me, I'm going to go for it.
Let's go.
OK, so Labour this week showed us that they are doing exactly what they're accusing the Conservatives of doing. They're playing politics with young girls that have been raped by mainly Pakistani Muslim men in the grooming gangs scandal. So they know that we need a national inquiry. The victims know that we need a national inquiry. Everybody knows that we need a national inquiry. But they're hoping they can get away with fudging it and just doing a little U-turn that isn't really a U-turn. So painfully, this week, Yvette Cooper came to the House to announce her inquiry, and we've got some footage here.
Effective local inquiries can delve into far more local detail and deliver more locally relevant answers and change than a lengthy nationwide inquiry can provide. So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford Inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas.
Right, there was Yvette. So there is going to be an inquiry, but it will be local inquiries, not a national one. There'll be national support, but Yvette couldn't answer whether or not anyone would be compelled to give evidence in them, so basically not. They're going to put £10 million behind it, which is a bit weird because Telford alone costs £7 million. And they're only going to look at 5 towns, where our own Charlie Peters has showed us that 50 towns are affected. So what is the point of what they have announced? I mean, imagine you're one of those girls who's been ignored, who's been bullied, who's been taken back to her rapist by people in power, people that they trusted. What would you want? I think I know what I would want, and I'd want it yesterday. I'd want an inquiry that was national, that got the names of every single person in a position of power who covered up this conspiracy, who continues to be in their role, and I would remove them immediately. I'd prosecute them and send them to jail. I'd want to know if it is still going on. I think it probably is. And I also would want to lift up that cultural stone and find out why these men of Pakistani Muslim culture feel able to rape girls of any other culture. And this will be a difficult conversation for Labour to have, and one that we need to have as a society, which will not appease their voter base. One has to ask, why don't they want this inquiry?
I'm just going to put this question to the whole panel, actually. Maybe you're right, Renee, they don't want it, but it does feel like the mood music is changing and it's going to happen anyway at some point. We're just doing a slow motion, it's like face-saving U-turn.
Why? Why don't they want to do it?
Because they don't want to swallow their pride. I mean, and as I'll go on to speak about in a moment, this is twice in a week Labour have failed to do a U-turn.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a U-turn, and it keeps these things that they're doing keep being labelled as U-turns. They're not U-turns, and like you said, Renee, they feel like they can get away with saying they're doing something and just thinking that the public are going to say, "Oh, that's great," but actually, it's nothing to do. They're not doing anything that's been requested. Even what Andy Burnham, Dan Carden, who I'll mention the BBC didn't even report on when he first broke the party line. They did not even report the fact that the first Labour MP had broke the party line calling for a national inquiry. I do not believe that Labour MPs, in their heart of hearts, think that what this government is doing is the right thing to do. They know, like you said, everyone knows we need a national inquiry. I can't believe that Keir Starmer hasn't faced more backlash from his backbenchers.
The reality is they want local inquiries so they can isolate particular groups of people as just isolated evil people. The whole thing about a national inquiry is that it will force a national conversation about national problems, particularly around Islam, around multiculturalism and around immigration. You don't have those conversations at local inquiry level. You only have that if it is a national inquiry because they are national issues that require a national response.
Well, and presumably, if they do get those answers, it's actually going to uncover the people in senior positions who covered this up, and they're going to have to explain why.
Yeah, you don't want people marking their own homework. Kai, do you think we need a national inquiry?
One of the main justifications in law for a national inquiry is public interest. And what they've failed to do, the Labour Party at the minute, and it's sort of shocking to watch, and you see this pattern in a lot of decisions that haven't been taken in recent months, is they've just not understood the mood music of the country until the point where it's too late. And I think that's what's happened here. Because politically, 76% of Brits believe that there should be a national inquiry. Whether or not you thought, actually, the right thing to do is implement the recommendations from the previous inquiry first. Whether or not you believe that, the time for that passed long ago. And they haven't gripped that issue well enough. And now I fear that anything they do, even this middle-of-the-road fudge, is not going to be enough for people.
So we concur, and I agree with you, but why would any political party or person, single person, not want to investigate the multiple gang raping of children?
But honestly, my honest view is I don't think it's fair for us to say, oh, there must be something else that we're not seeing, or to suggest that these people, many of whom, Jess Phillips as a great example, have campaigned on these issues for years.
No,
I don't believe for a second,
I
don't believe for a second that these people don't believe that this needs to be dealt with. However, I think it's just another case of not seeing the woods for the trees.
Are they squeamish about being seen to be on the side of the wrong people? By which I mean they're placating the far right if they go for this national inquiry and if they go whole too quickly. And they're just, it's sort of a political choice.
They're squeamish about everything really right now.
Okay.
Because they have, Labour base is a particular makeup of people in the UK, and they're worried about losing that group of people. They're also worried about the threat from Reform, because Reform is pulling voters from Labour and from the Conservatives. So they're worried, and in their worry, they are doing not very much.
And abandoning children.
They're worried that this would smash their multicultural worldview, which is the cornerstone of everything that the modern left believes in. That's really why we're not hearing anything now on a national inquiry.
Right, let's move on to the next one. Who's up next? Who wants to go for it?
I think that's me.
Why don't you jump in? Let's go.
More of me, yes. Well, on Friday, a 32-year-old man was sentenced to life in prison, 22 years and 8 months minimum, for his brutal and unprovoked attack on a stranger last April. Now, the victim says that the pain in his hand is unbearable and excruciating, and has turned his previously happy life into a distant memory. Now, who was the victim of this wanton crime? An Eritrean asylum seeker who was in temporary housing in a hotel. Who was the sick individual behind this attack? A neo-Nazi with Adolf Hitler's signature tattooed on his arm. Why did he do it? He said it was as a protest against small boats crossings, and in his manifesto said that he was doing his duty for England, and sent this manifesto, or tried to send it, to a number of right-wing politicians. Well, colour me unsurprised. Turns out, if you wage a war on migrants in this country, stirring up hatred, and sowing disinformation about why they come to this country and who they are and where they come from, no wonder that this rhetoric has tragic and devastating consequences. Right. But shame on all the politicians who have let this be the case. Okay. Words have consequences, and cruel rhetoric against migrants is directly linked to far-right activity.
Renee, I can feel you want to jump in quickly, but I want to see what Connie has to say, because she didn't jump in the last one. We were going crazy. So, Connie, what do you make of this story? But also, I'm interested in the student perspective on this, what this sort of story, how it's discussed on campuses. What do you make of it?
Well, firstly, it's horrific what's happened, Kai, but I don't think you can go from saying that obviously an extremely radicalised person who idolises Adolf Hitler has got to that point, has Hitler's signature tattooed on his arm because of rhetoric against immigration. I think it's such a stretch. And so if you are concerned about people waging a war, as you say, against migration and immigrants and asylum seekers, then this repression of language that you're talking about is how we get to this point now, where we've been suppressing people's conversations about this so much, and now it's all exploded. If we allow people to have open conversations, then perhaps, like you say, things like this won't happen. But to say that this is as a result of certain language is absolutely ridiculous.
There's a difference between open conversations and the kind of awful rhetoric that you see
who
in a
is it?
succession of government.
Can you give an example of whose language it is then? Whose language are you referring to?
Priti Patel kicking off the Borders Bill by describing a plague of migrants. Suella Braverman saying that it was her dream and obsession to deport people to uninhabited islands. Do you think that's right?
Whether or not it's right, you think they're responsible for a man who's become so radicalised that he has stabbed an asylum seeker?
A Hope Not Hate report showed that when politicians politicians go out in the media, and when the right-wing press boosterise this kind of vile rhetoric, it's directly linked to an uptick in far-right activity on Telegram as the private communication channel. That is just a fact.
Okay,
Right,
I think the moment that you mention hope, not hate, you actually lose all credibility to your argument, because they are one of the most divisive and one of the groups that actually stirs racial division so that they can actually make these points. So I think you should put that aside, and I wouldn't use it again if I were you, if you want to argue this sensibly. The thing is, Kai, what you would like in your pretty little world that's all fluffy and lovely and there are clouds and sunshine everywhere is that we never say another word. And if an Eritrean man or another man goes out and he rapes a girl, we don't say anything just in case it inflames some lunatic right-wing Nazi, because that's what he is, and he deserved every year of his 22-year sentence because he was a vile racist thug. We're never going to get rid of vile racist thugs. We do need to talk about what's going on in our country, Kai.
Yeah. I think there's open conversations. As I said, there's open conversations, and then there's this extreme language that is redolent of the kind of things that you saw in some right-wing papers in 1939 about Jews fleeing Germany. It's exactly the same kind of narrative that's being peddled now by many of these outlets.
The Jews now, when they pick the pro-Palestinian people march on our streets every week, Kai.
I don't think that's right. You know that.
Yeah. Well, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm less worried about colourful language than I am about the root causes of these particular problems. The fact is, Kai, you are representative of this leftist mentality that says words of violence, that says we need to just push these things off into the corners, and that's how you get cover-ups like grooming gangs. That's how you get migrant crime, which is rampant across this country. We need to be less worried about the odd, colourful rhetoric and more worried about the problems themselves.
I mean, Kai, isn't the Labour Party's current language on this pretty robust as well?
Robust, but doesn't go to the lengths that you've seen in successive Conservative governments and on the rest of the political right. Things like smashing the gangs, for instance, that reframing, that is going after exactly the right people it should, and isn't directing the anger and the rhetoric against the migrants themselves.
So the people
that's
who are
important.
Of
that
these
makes a
sorts of
difference.
crimes, people who are capable of these sorts of crimes are nuanced enough to distinguish these slight differences in language. Is that your argument?
Because it becomes part of the culture. What we've seen is the mainstreaming of the extreme language in the last few years. So yes, things like this contribute. It's exactly that, because one might be a drop in the ocean, but it contributes to the hell of a lot more.
Connie, I just wanted to jump back to you again, because I said earlier, the attitude to this on campuses. You're a student at the moment. I'm interested in how people in university campuses react to these sorts of stories, and, you know, Kai's talk about language and how we discuss immigration and asylums. What's it like at university at the moment on these sorts of issues?
Well, like Will was saying, it's very much the mainstream student view that words are violence, but on this topic specifically, you wouldn't dare discuss immigration at university in case, because even saying anything, I imagine that you would get shut down quite quickly. But yeah, words of violence is a very common narrative.
Right.
Would you be able to talk about the right-wing Nazi thug?
Oh, of course you would, yeah.
Well, there we go. All right.